All right. So everyone, welcome. Welcome to Alumni Weekend. It feels strange to say that in this context, but it's important, I think, to say it. We're really happy to celebrate alumni and to celebrate coming together, even in circumstances like this. It feels even more important to recognize all of our connections. And we're glad that Writers House is a way we can come together. I'm Jessica Lowenthal. I'm the director of Writers House, and I'm happy we're here. Thank you for coming. I'm going to say a couple more things about Zoom. This will be repetitive because I've said most of them already. And then I'll say a couple things about Andy Wolk, and then we'll jump right in. So first of all, about Zoom, as I said, you're muted by default. You have the capacity to unmute yourself. Many of you have probably been doing this for work or with family. It's the same as in those scenarios. If you haven't done it before, you just kind of move your mouse around, and unmute and mute should toggle up onto your screen. And if for some reason you're having any trouble with that, if you click on the bottom of the screen, there's a chat box, and a couple of us will monitor what's happening in that chat box. And if you really need help, say, please, somebody call me. And Nick, who's on this call, he just raised his hand. He'll give you a call. He'll give you a call, or he'll give you his cell phone number. So there will be times when Andy will say, he'll ask for your input, and the easiest way to do that will be just raise your hand and to wave a little bit. And because we're on two screens, you might need to wave a couple of times. Don't be shy about that. We're just going to go with the visual cues, and then Andy will know you want to talk. And really, don't be shy about that. Okay, I think that's it for the Zoom. I won't give a huge formal introduction of Andy Wolk here, but I will just say that as you all saw in the bio, I think he's an award-winning screenwriter and director. He's written screenplays for just about every studio out there, and teleplays and pilots for every network, including HBO's Emmy-winning From Earth to the Moon. He's directed films for features, cable, network, along with episodes of sort of all the shows we're probably all watching right now in this time. The Sopranos, The Practice, Medium, Ugly Betty, Criminal Minds, and Without a Trace. And of course, he is a Penn grad, which is so wonderful. So you're in really good hands here. Before I turn it over, I just want to say more personally, we really couldn't have done this without Andy's enthusiasm and commitment and the willingness to say, yeah, this is important. I want to keep doing it. So we at Writers House are just thrilled for that.
Jessica,
so, thank you.
Could you say a few words, a very few words about what Writers House does? I'm a
Sure.
class of 72 English grad of Penn.
Happily. So Writers House is a bunch of things. It's a community space, it's an event space, it's a classroom building. At its core, what we want to do is convene people around writing. So the goal ultimately is creating and sustaining community with writing as the thing that does that. And that happens in so many ways. We have students who meet for discussions, we have in-curriculum classes, we have workshops like this. That's Writers House in a nutshell.
Great. Thank you.
Sure. Okay, Andy, you want to take it away?
Absolutely. So first of all, good question about the Writers House is an extraordinary institution. I wish it were around when I was at Penn. It was not. But from its inception, I think I've been involved a lot with Al Philrees and Jessica and the tremendous staff who are just a joy to work with, and putting this all together when we had the idea we were going to do this live at Penn over Alumni Weekend, but as you know, W.C. Field said, on the whole, I'd rather be in Philadelphia, but here we are online, and this will be great. So we'll take a break somewhere in the middle, and here we go. I really want to start on an optimistic note. I'm assuming everyone's here because you want to learn about writing a screenplay or a pilot. Is that right? Maybe show your hands just to see if you have interest in that. Great, excellent. And how many people have actually written a screenplay or a script of some sort? So, wow, okay, good. So this is really, a lot of people, you've probably heard about this through the Writers House email list. So that we're starting ahead of the game. How many people like started a screenplay but never finished it? A couple of people, yeah, a few people, that's right. And what about, how many people had an idea for a screenplay but never quite got around to writing it? Yeah, there you are. Okay, so this is the perfect group for this. And that idea, that impulse behind the movie to educate or to entertain or to move is why we're here, why we do this, why we want to create it, and certainly why we want to experience it on our televisions or in the movies. And I said I was going to be optimistic, and I am, but writing is really hard. The good news, and this is really good news in terms of the business of writing in film and television, is that it's a business that is material driven, and it's about the material. And in that sense, the best idea or the best script will win. And when you look at the world, there's so many now, so many more places who are looking for material from, as we know, there's been an explosion of streaming: Netflix, Hulu, Amazon, Disney Plus, Peacock, HBO Max, the list goes on. And they're looking for material that they don't have right now. So it goes down to, if you can write a good script, the world will be the path to your door. The thing about Hollywood, the thing about Los Angeles and New York to a great degree, is that people come out here for glamour, for the entertainment business, because they see it as something where there's glamour, there's excitement, there's money to be made, and art to be made, if you will. The problem is, the vast majority of people who do come here, they can't write or direct or act, but they can read. And the fact that they can read puts them into wanting to be in this business, to be an agent, to be an executive, to be a manager, to be a producer. And the way that those people rise in the world is when they find you and the script that you've written. So that Lawrence Bender found some guy working in a video store writing scripts. He found that script, and it was Quentin Tarantino, and that turned into a huge thing, of course, for Tarantino, but for Lawrence Bender, who became a major producer, and all the agents and executives who went along with that. It made a company that was nothing, Miramax. It made it into a giant company, which ultimately, as we all know, went down in flames. But we want to talk about writing movies now, starting with movies. And writing movies is really a nuts and bolts activity, kind of like, I would say, like architecture, that when you write a script, you create a blueprint that people will actually follow. And that script is, first and foremost, it's something that you want to sell so that they will follow it. But every little thing that you put in a script gets done. And a story I'll tell you about that, there was a movie that my brother, another Penn graduate, and I were writing for Showtime and Paramount based on the old Defenders TV series. And when we were writing, one of the executives at Showtime said, the main female character is not likable enough. And what we need to do to humanize her, you should give her a cat. So if you give her a cat, you write a cat in, I think that'll just we'll know that she's just not completely hard-boiled. So I said, okay. And we wrote a cat into several scenes. They loved the script. They greenlit the script. And we went to Toronto to film it. I was also directing it. So I'm in Toronto, I'm in the production office, and the prop guy comes up to me and he said, I got to show you something. It's very important. And I said, what is it? He said, well, I've got a lot of pictures of cats here, and you have to choose a cat. And I said, what cat? He said, well, you wrote a cat into the script, and now we've got to have a cat. And I realized he's reading the script, and he's doing it. And I said, hey, I'm cutting the cat. The cat is going away. But that is what a script is. A script has a kind of limited readership of people who become obsessed with it. And that limited readership that you're writing a script for, you're really writing a script for agents, producers, executives, and stars. essentially the people who can say yes or no to green lighting your script. Because the script, it's like a blueprint for a building. If that building doesn't get built, the script, it's not like you've written a novel or a poem or a short story. The script really only exists when someone makes it. So ask yourself as you launch into this, what is a movie worth? Now, I go to a lot of movies out here, and you know, to me, if you go to the theaters are expensive, it's $15 or $20 at the ArcLight to see a movie, but that's worth $15. I want to see every movie. Now I can't even do that, but you stream them. So Netflix is $15 a month. That's what it's worth to me. But if the person who's reading your script, to them, it is really worth a tremendous amount, because they're saying, is it worth $9 or $10 million that I'm going to have to invest in this to make it? Is it worth $100 million? And what about a couple years of my life putting it together? And what about my professional reputation? So all of that is really our goal, is to get people who have a huge stake. It's a limited readership, but they have a huge stake in your script. How do we get them to say yes and tell your story? So the first thing I want you to think about is structure. Screenwriting is about structure. More than, you know, a novel can go in a million different directions. A poem can be what it is, but a screenplay it kind of has a form. And what I want to go over here this morning is really how to understand the basic storytelling form of screenwriting, which is something that is going to, you know, it's something that in some way you have to get a hold of and master before even ringing changes on it, which is something that you can absolutely do. So the first thing we'll think about is structure. What are the elements of that go into a screenplay? So let me ask the class, just raise your hand if you want to tell me what are the elements of structure and that you think are important in a screenplay. If I wish I had a whiteboard here, I could write everything down. So just raise your hand and unmute yourself. Yes? Any ideas, any thoughts on, yeah, I can't see your name.
That's okay, it's Tony.
In the Penn shirt, yeah.
Yeah.
Tell me what you're thinking.
Start with a 3-act structure.
Okay, so you're starting with so Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3. Is there anything else that you can tell me about those 3 acts?
I would say there's you're developing characters throughout Act 1 and 2. That characters are exposed through action and dialogue. So you're introducing characters. They're rising in activity. They're crystallizing, and there's got to be some arc in those 3 acts.
Okay, well, okay, I think that's good. I'm going to even simplify what you're saying. I like what you're saying a lot. And let's just say it's a beginning, middle, and end. Act 1, Act 2, and Act 3, just launching us, beginning, middle. Okay, and Arlo.
Put a guy in a tree, make him likable, and get him down. That's the...
So that's a model, I guess. But let's start with a guy or a man or a woman as a character. So we'll put character as a big aspect of our structural ingredients. Anybody else want to throw some other things in? Yeah, Susie.
You need to create an inciting incident and set your character into a world that he or she cannot return from. And once they're in that world, they need to face conflicts and have the highest highs and the lowest lows and develop their arc through that.
Okay, good, really good. I think there are 2 things in there that I want to sort of pull out. One is the idea of an inciting incident. It's a little bit sort of screenwriting 101 maybe, but it's right in some way, and we'll talk about that. And also, you mentioned conflict. And conflict becomes a big element. Great. Asher.
I think Godard and Cal said all you need is a girl, a guy, and a gun.
Say that again. I'm having a little trouble hearing you.
Oh, I think Godard and Cal said all you need is a girl, a guy, and a gun.
It was hard to hear. I can't quite.
All you need is a girl, a guy, and a gun.
A girl, a guy, and a gun. Well, that, yeah, but I think that they're starting again with character. Character. Any other thoughts? And that main character, do we have like a name for that main character? Yeah, Christina?
I guess I was actually thinking about a hook that like you need to have something that's kind of primal, like the characters are reaching out.
Okay, I think that,
connect to.
yep, I'm going to agree with that. And Chris, you had your hand up?
Protagonist.
A protagonist. So that character that, you know, I love that word protagonist. I think it's great. And if you have a protagonist, you also have an antagonist. Okay. Any other elements? Any other elements?
Structure, I think, Andy, could be simplified to the first part is introduction to setting and characters. The second part revolves around conflict and crisis. And the third part is resolution.
Well, I think we're going to get through a lot of that. I'm going to
maybe too simple. I don't know.
No, not too simple. Good. What, you know, anything else? Anyone else want to jump in?
Alexandra.
These are all that. This is a very advanced class. I'm happy with this class. Anything else?
It looks like Alexandra has.
Lauren. Lauren.
We're talking about what a character wants versus what a character needs.
Well, I like the word want. What wants are what. Let's use objectives is a good acting word for that. Yeah, and Alexandra.
I've always heard what premise, plot, dialogue, setting, characters. Yeah, those 5.
Okay, so I'm going to take 2 of those, plot and dialogue. I like plot. We're going to come into that. So I think that's really good. I think that, you know, all of these kinds of things that you're talking about and that we're putting up on our imaginary whiteboard of character, conflict, beginning, middle, and end, plot, protagonist, dialogue. Which one, how do you start? So we've got all these elements of structure. What is the one that's maybe most important in terms of how we start writing our screenplay? Any thoughts? What do you pick out of all of these? Yes, Deborah.
Yes, hello.
Hi.
Wondering if, you know, focusing on one of the characters could be a way to start. I'm a physician. I don't have a lot of experience with writing and screenplays. I have family members who do what you do. And I know it's a lot of work. But I'm wondering if sometimes you have like the main character in a book or a movie, and you may want to start with that character.
So Deborah, yeah, I have a lot of relatives that do what you do, and I know that's a lot of work. Yes, I think that you make a really valid, great point about character, and that's really where I want to start with this, is character. That you can have an image or a scene or maybe a theme, a subject matter that you want to get into as a screenwriter, but the most important thing is really going to be character. No matter what, it's about character, and you have to have a central character, and we're going to talk a strong central character. And the first reason why you have to have that is that casting is everything. This is something I learned when I was, starting out in this business. Casting is everything. And nothing gets made without an actor. And people don't put up money unless you've got actor or actors who they feel are not only right for the role, but are going to draw people to the theater or to the television screen. And so how do we go about that? So as you create the character that you want to tell your story about, think like an actor. Will they want to play the role? You just don't have a movie without actors. In fact, I would recommend taking an acting class. I think that one of the ways you learn about writing scripts for actors is by taking an acting class. No matter where you live, well, I'm sure people are all, scattered all over the country now. But how many people have taken acting classes? Just, raise your hands. Let me see. Couple there, yeah. Yeah, highly recommended taking an acting class. It will help you in your writing. It'll be fun. It's a great thing to do. A little scary, but ask yourself, why is an actor going to be attracted to this role? How is it surprising? How is it different? What am I going to root for with them? And these are the kind of questions you want to ask yourself as you launch into a script. So you've got this central character, and how do you introduce that character? The most important thing in the world to think about, the thing to think about is, what do they want on page 1? What is the most important thing in the world to your character on page 1? So, and now I asked everybody, if you could, to watch The Verdict. Did most everybody, have you seen The Verdict? Okay, great. So now, seeing The Verdict, what is the most important thing to Galvin, to Paul Newman, on page 1 in the beginning of the script? What's the most important thing to him? Yes? Raise your hand. And yeah, Tony?
He seems pretty focused on beating that pinball game.
Focused on what?
Winning the game of pinball.
He a game of pinball that he loses, actually. But
Yeah.
But more than that, what else do people think? What is really important to him? Alexandra?
He wants to get a client.
He wants a client. Why does he want a client?
He wants to make money, so he's like
Money.
Yeah.
Money. He wants money. And what else is really important to him in the beginning? Yeah, Steve?
Drinking.
Booze, drinking. So the most important, and Zach, let's take a look at that opening sequence. Since we have the technology, let's just look at that opening sequence. So when you look at that scene, or those scenes there, what's great about it is it sets up, almost without really any dialogue at all, very little, that what's important to him is booze and money. And you see, I mean, Lumet emphasizes it with that close-up shot of the money. You see that he's an ambulance or obituary chasing lawyer, that this is who he is. And it allows us, in the opening of a movie, you want to be able to show who your lead character is before something happens to them. And if you think about movies, it's often done, and I think a really good technique to do it is through work, through the work that they do. For example, if you see this, you see, well, he's going around to funeral homes. If you look at Joker, if you've seen Joker, he's putting on his makeup and he's being this horrible clown on the street trying to get people to buy things. Or Jojo Rabbit, he's training as a Hitler Youth, trying to get himself into the high ranks of Hitler Youth. Or Lady Bird, it's not a job so much in Lady Bird, but Saoirse Ronan is battling with her mother, hating her mother. All she wants is to get away from her mother. That how you set what's important to your character in the beginning of your movie is not what the movie will be about. And I'm going to repeat that. Whatever they want, it's not what the movie is about from page 1. And it's basic storytelling. If you look at something like Hamlet, you first meet Hamlet at the funeral of his father, and what does he want? He wants to go home, go back to Wittenberg, and go to college. He's ready to leave, and something happens. And something happens is a really good way to think about how we then launch into our movie story. So 5 minutes before the movie begins, they could not have imagined the problem that is going to be thrust upon them. And how they solve this problem is the subject of your movie. So there's a problem in the verdict. It's the problem is this case that he's forgotten about rears its head, and he's got to deal with the case. And this, as someone was saying, it can be a bigger or smaller thing. In a movie like Kramer versus Kramer, he's working late, he loves work, he ignores his family, he comes home, and there's Meryl Streep saying, "I'm leaving you, and I'm leaving you the kid. Goodbye." That it's a problem thrust upon them. And as you think of yourself as a storyteller, that this, as someone brought up, is the hook. And they can't do what they wanted to do. They're going to be forced to do something else. They didn't have a clue what would befall them. And I like the idea. I mean, someone said this is an inciting incident or event, but this will let you think about the larger thematic concern of your movie. I like the word event. It's a word that it's tricky in the sense, if I ask you the question, what is the event of the movie? And maybe the best way to think about it is if you could summarize the event in one sentence. So let's take a look at the verdict. What's the event of the movie? Someone want to tell me what it is in one sentence? Kind of thing that you have in front of you. Yes, anyone? Yeah, Tony? Is that right? I'm sorry, not Tony. PW?
Would it be when he turns down the check?
Well, as opposed to saying like, hey, that's an incredibly important thing that we're going to get to. But I want you to think about the event of the movie as one sentence that describes the whole thing, that describes the whole movie. So
okay. Disgraced lawyer finds a case that can give him a sense of self-respect. And
I like that. I think that's pretty good. It almost should be like the tagline, like the tagline for the poster. So say that again. What you said,
a disgraced lawyer finds a case that can bring him back.
That can bring him back.
They can bring him back to notoriety, success, self-respect.
Do people like that? Yeah, Alexandra. Yeah.
Vindication.
I would say disgraced ambulance chaser finds redemption.
Finds redemption. Okay. Okay. Yeah. I think these are good. In some way, they're very good. It's really. I think I like redemption. I like disgrace. To me, I would think maybe down and out lawyer gets an impossible case to fight, and he discovers who he truly is. Something along these lines, I think, is very good. It's almost what you want to be the tagline on the movie poster. I was thinking of, there's a movie poster I love for, I don't know if anybody ever saw this movie, Kelly's Heroes. It's a war movie, World War II, a bunch of bums in the army, and it's Clint Eastwood and Telly Savalas. And the tagline was, they set out to rob a bank and damn near won a war instead. And I think, okay, I see that. You see what the movie is. If it's your kind of movie, you're going to go see it. So your down and out lawyer, your disgraced lawyer that you're talking about, this is really what's going on in Act 1. And in Act 1 of a movie, the character does not want to deal with the problem. Whatever the problem is that has been thrust upon them, they'd like it to go away so they can get back to where they were at the beginning. In the verdict, he wants this case to do what? Anyone? What does he want this case to do? Yeah, Greg.
Settle.
Settle for what?
Making money. Yeah.
A lot of money. Money. Yeah. In some ways, you want to keep that simple. So you absolutely settle for money. So now, as we approach the end of Act 1 in your story, how it is, I want to talk about character. And, as you can see, I'm a little obsessed with character. And one of the ways that I'd like you to think about character, and this is a real screenwriting way to do it, is to think about the arc of character. I think someone mentioned arc before when we were talking about things, and it's something that you find. I mean, in many, I can't tell you how many meetings I've been in out here with studio executives and producers who've read a script, and we're talking about the script, and they say, what is the arc of character? And usually they do a little gesture, or sometimes, and it's right, what is the, kind of like the arc of character, and they prescribe a little arc going there. But and the arc of character should make you, what I want you to think about is where your central character was at the beginning of the movie and where they're going to get to at the end of the movie. And this is going to be a completely different spot because they have been forced to change by what's happened. Now, in real life, no one changes because they want to change. It's forced upon us by a problem that they could not have foreseen. And this essence of character change or growth or however you want to put it is the essence of movies. And this is what separates a movie, a long-form movie, from television. In television, where you have half-hour and hour shows, let's say a sitcom, anybody know why a sitcom is called a sitcom? Why is it called a situation comedy? Anyone want to, Julia?
Never mind.
Never mind. Okay. Anyone else? Anyone want to pipe up on why it is? Yeah, Greg?
Different situation every week.
A different situation every week, but the characters never change. So, and this is really important to start to understand. And we'll talk about TV a little later, but when you think about something like Seinfeld, that George and Jerry and Kramer and Elaine are always the same. They are confronted with a different situation each week. They may not be able to find their car in a parking lot, or they may think a little baby at the bris is ugly. Whatever it is, they will have it's funny to think of that. They will have a response perfectly in camera, in character. And that's true about our shows also, that the situation changes. Is a different crime to solve. There may be some development, but the characters essentially stay the same week in, week out, as the story itself is serialized. But now, what we're thinking about here, what we're talking about in film, is arc of character and how a character is forced to change. And it means you'll know the ending of your movie as you begin it. When you've thought about what kind of character your protagonist is at the beginning, you want to think at the end of the movie, he or she is going to be the opposite. And I want you to think about that in a really technical fashion, the opposite. So if you, and this is the most basic storytelling, that Oedipus goes from arrogant to humiliated. Hamlet goes from indecisive to heroic. Whatever your story is, the Joker goes from being weak, beaten down, and humiliated to on top of the world as a crime lord. Act one, then, will be a series of scenes where the protagonist does not try to solve the problem thrust upon him, but tries to make it go away. And now, this leads me to the word scenes. When you make a movie, you direct it scene by scene. You don't direct the whole movie on one day. You write a movie scene by scene, and you direct a movie scene by scene. You write scenes. So all of you, so many of you have written things. What goes into writing a scene? What are the questions that you want to ask yourself as you launch into writing a scene? Maybe anyone want to volunteer something here? Yeah, Michael.
What the conflict is between
conflict. Great, conflict. And where does conflict come from, Michael?
People having opposing wants, or someone standing.
Okay, I like that. So, I think that we could call it having opposing wants. There's conflict in a scene. I would use the word, a want is a great word. You can use that. maybe the more traditional word is an objective, that people have objectives and they are clashing, and that there's an obstacle. There's going to be there's an obstacle. There's an objective. There's an obstacle. What else? What other elements go into a scene? Yeah, Susie.
How is this going to move the plot forward?
They want to say that the scene moves the plot forward, moves the story. And so, how would you say it does that? Can you be a little more specific?
Well, your character, it gets closer to solving the problem, or confronting the conflicts, or resolving the conflicts without having a lot of extra fluff that takes away or distracts from the story.
Okay, well, I'm gonna say that a little more simply. That if you ask yourself the question, and this is really true of the most important scenes, if you ask the question, what is different at the end of the scene than from the beginning of the scene? That because of this conflict, because of the obstacle that Michael is talking about, something is different. The other thing that I think you want to look for in a scene, is there anyone else want to add to that or subtract from that? Yes, no? So the other things you want to think about when you're writing a scene is, because if we go, as you know, I think Susie's right, we're in one place in the beginning, we're maybe in a different place in the end, that, as Michael said, the character has an objective, something's in its way, hopefully it gets solved and it moves the story further along. That looking for in a scene, I would say there are a couple things we want to look for. One is a turning point. What forces the character to change? Does something happen in the scene that's a turning point? And maybe what is the climax of the scene? Just as our story overall is going to have turning points and a climax, what about in an individual scene? So if so everybody feel like we kind of understand that? That's clear what I'm saying? Yes? Raise your hand. Yeah, clear? Great. So let's talk about, it's very important, the end of Act 1. And what is the scene in the verdict that is the final scene of Act 1? Alexandra.
When he refuses the check and he tells his friend that he's going to try the case.
Well, let's pick one scene. There are a couple. Those are two scenes.
Oh, okay. When he rejects the check.
So you're saying the end of Act 1 is when he's in the scene with the bishop.
No. Yeah, but I also have.
Yes.
I kind of feel like the other answer to that question is when he goes to the hospital. That scene, because he does it all without any words.
Right, Alex,
it happens without any words.
You picked the two scenes that are right on the money, but you got to choose one. So
my choice is the scene in the hospital.
The scene in the now, other people, what do you feel? How many people maybe feel the scene in the hospital? Chris, yes.
I would agree. I would say there are two moments of pregnant reflection. One is taking the drink over the arcade game in the opening, and the other is the hospital scene where he's photographing the corpse, right, and he takes a very long pause. That seemed to me the turning point.
Okay, so people, how many people feel that the scene in the hospital with the Polaroid pictures is the end of Act 1? Right, show of hands. Couple, and how many people feel the scene with the bishop is the turning point? Okay, so in some way, let's look at the first scene and the Polaroid scene. And when we do, what I want you to think about is a great scene, beautifully written and acted and directed scene, is exactly this thing we're talking about in scene writing. What are the objectives? What is Paul Newman's objective? How is he trying to achieve it? What is the turning point? And what is the climax of the scene? And then we'll be able to maybe think a little more about, is this the end of Act 1? So let's look at, Zach, the scene in the hospital, please. Okay, great. So now, what a great scene. Every aspect of that scene is perfect in my opinion. So let's ask ourselves the questions that we started with, because I think it's a great scene to look at in terms of, for you, using it in some way as a model to writing scenes. So let's start in the beginning. What is Galvin's intention or objective in the scene? What is it? Yeah, Lauren.
To get evidence for his case, to take pictures of his client.
Right, okay, so and clearly to get evidence for his case, to take pictures for his client. And the nice thing again about that is it's active. Taking pictures is something to do. It's active. So that's his objective, to win his case and to get money. So that's his objective, taking pictures. So now, what is the turning point in the scene? Yeah, Alexandra.
The pictures. Oh,
I guess there are two Alexandras. Alexandra Anderson and then Alexandra McFadden.
Okay.
Okay. So, yeah, Alexandra Anderson first. What's the turning point of the scene?
When the pictures develop.
When the pictures develop? Okay. Alexandra.
I've gone to Lexi.
You've gone to Lexi. Okay, great. Lexi.
He's looking through the camera, and before we see the photos become real, she becomes real to him.
And how do you know that?
He stops and he starts looking at her, not through the camera, not through that filter, but he's looking at her in the hospital.
Anyone else? Anyone else want to launch into that? Chris?
I'm going to dredge up an old word from my English classes at Penn, objective correlative. As the pictures take form, the issue in his own mind takes form, and he realizes this is a human being, not just a money case.
Well, I think that, in some ways, what you're saying, what the other people say, it's all very intellectually correct. I totally buy it. But again, I'm going to think much more practically in terms of writing, directing, acting. And when you have a turning point, you have to find a way to show it. It can't just be, well, I see it in his eye, the thought necessarily. It's got to be something happens. Susie?
I think it's when he says, I'm her attorney or I'm her lawyer.
Well, is that the turn? I'm gonna say that what happens in the scene is when and the change, which is the turning point, as you're saying, he sees those pictures and the pictures affect him. But how do we show that? And we show it that he sits down. When he sits down, we see that it has affected him. And that's that moment where it's affected him, so that the climax of the scene becomes what Susie is bringing up when he says, I'm her attorney. That's an enormous change. But there he's gone into this as a guy who's kind of an ambulance chaser looking for money, and he's come out, I'm her attorney. And that's the climax of the scene. But before you can get to that, and again, this is in the writing, the acting, the directing, it's why, it's what makes filming something so great. It's like looking for that moment when there is a change. And when that change happens, and it's as subtle as just sitting, but that's where we understand that as Chris's objective correlative happens. You can't say to an actor, this is the objective correlative moment. And in some way, you got to have it written there and they get it and they understand it. So when you look at that scene, but is that scene the end of Act 1? Or is it the scene, Lexi's shaking her head no, and the reason that it isn't is what happens in the next scene, in the verdict. So let's just, this is the end of Act 1 is what I would like you to think about. And usually if you think of a screenplay as being 120 pages, then Act 1 is usually 25 to 30 pages, and that end of Act 1 happens somewhere about 25, 27 minutes in. It's when the central character has reached a point of no return. I can't go back. So Zach, let's look at the bishop scene if we could. What's great about the scene is that he can't go back. He's what's the expression? He's crossed the Rubicon. He's crossing the Rubicon there, and you can't go back. And every little detail. I mean, it's a scene that is very slow paced, which is fine. And every detail, I think Tony points out the way he puts back the photos, the way he slackly kind of lets go of the check. That every detail, you know, he's reached a point of no return, and that brings us. So it's clear. I mean, is that everybody? I just want to, as we move on to Act 2, that's pretty clear to everybody. Yes. So the Act 2. Now you get into the real writing, where well, the way I like to think of Act 2 is as when I was teaching a directing class at AFI, American Film Institute, one of the students said, well, Act 2 is where the adventure begins. And I love that expression, the adventure begins. And it's where the plot kicks in. So I think we've used the word plot several times. People have brought it up. Can someone define plot for me? What is the plot? It's a word everybody uses all the time. I don't see any hands leaping into the air. Deborah.
The plot is basically what the meat of the story is about. Like, you know, you have this attorney who's an ambulance chaser. You know, the movie starts with him at the arcade, and then he goes through this period of inflection, you know, when he realizes with his one and only client that he has, like.
I don't want you to, don't describe the plot of this particular movie. What is, in a sentence, what is a plot? What is plot?
The plot is what the story's about.
What the story's about, okay. Amaris, did I pronounce that right?
It's Amaris, no worries. I would say it's a series of actions that the character has to take to solve the problem, achieve their goal, and the obstacles that get in their way.
I think that's a pretty good definition. I like that. It's a series of actions, series of incidents. Each one's a conflict that gets dealt with and leads to the next. If you think of the plot of your story, if you think of it as a sequence of events where each one affects the one that's going to come after it, just like the Polaroid scene affects the Bishop scene. One conflict is solved, which leads to another. It's kind of a cause and effect, if you will. And it leads, so when you write Act 2, and this is really just writing all your scenes per se, a good idea to think of when you write a scene is to name the scene so that you could each, like, tell me an example of some scenes in Act 2 of The Verdict as he's building his case. What's an Act 2 scene? Anyone? In the middle of the story. Yeah, Chris.
Loss of his star witness.
He loses his witness. So that's a scene, and that will lead to the next. What's another scene? And I love naming the scene. Yeah, Alexandra.
When he meets Charlotte Rampling in the bar.
He meets Charlie. He meets a love interest. You know, that will lead to something else. So I don't want to go through all the scenes of The Verdict at all. You've all seen it. But what I want you to think about is it has to do, the second act is an action where your protagonist, where he or she is going about solving their problem. And it is a rising action. If you think of each scene, even though there are setbacks, and that leads to something else, that it's sort of rising, going up and up and up. He falls in love. He loses a witness. He gets another witness. Plot is the series of scenes that advances the story, and it has this rising action because it's going to a victory. So each scene leads to it's getting better and better. Our hero or heroine is going to have a victory. Obstacles, we know that there's an obstacle in each scene. Obstacles are being overcome, or if it's a setback, they find a way to get around it, but we are going to win. So if you think of that as the second act of the story, this is writing. This is getting better. Your writing is getting better and better. We're caught up in the story. At the end of Act 2, what happens at the end of Act 2? This is a word I think that did not come up in our structure list, but I think it's a good word. At the end of Act 2, what happens? Lexi?
The dark moment.
Well, there's a dark moment. Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. I like that. Any other thoughts on what happens at the end of Act 2? Anyone? Yeah, Christina?
All is lost.
All is lost, the dark moment. Yes. So the word that I would use about what happens, although I love All is Lost, I like that it's a very dark moment. At the end of Act 2, there is a giant reversal. And the word that the reason I like reversal is because preceding it should be what we think is victory. So this is, if we think of that rising action in Act 2, going up to, this is going to be a big, big victory. At the moment of the greatest happiness, of the greatest victory, of our movie is going to end with in such a great way, there is a reversal. All is lost, right? There's a dark moment. So let's talk for a second at this point of victory, where everything goes incredibly wrong. And as a writer, you should ask yourself the question, what is the worst possible thing that I can make happen for my character? At the moment of near victory, what is the worst thing that can happen for my character? Then do it. It happens to your character, it comes out of something they've done. And now, if we look at the verdict, what is the scene? What is the reversal at the end of Act 2? What scene is the reversal? Yeah, Michael.
When they say that the witness, they throw out the witness's testimony, the rebuttal.
Who throws out the witness's testimony?
The judge.
The judge does. Okay. I'm gonna let's hold that in abeyance for a second. Anyone else? Tony?
I thought when the Charlotte Rampling character is discovered to have betrayed him.
What? Okay, Tony. Good. What scene are you talking about?
The scene with James Mason's monologue talking about his success, and it ends with, we discover he's been speaking to the Charlotte Rampling character.
Sure. Right. So let's look at that that scene, and I think this is a good example of how we can start to understand what a reversal is, and that in the scene. If I use the, do you know who's number one on the call sheet in the verdict? Do you know what I mean by that? Yes? If you don't, raise your hand. Okay, so let me explain. So on a call, when you're making a movie, a television show, the day's work you get the night before, and it's on something called the call sheet. And on the call sheet, you have, what crew members do, and the actors are listed and what time they're going to be called, what time they have to be in hair and makeup. And number one on the call sheet is the star of the movie. And so you always talk number one, number two, number three. Number one, and Tony, who's the star of our movie, The Verdict? Who's the star?
Paul Newman.
Who's number one on the call sheet?
Paul Newman.
Who's not in the scene with James Mason and Charlotte Rampling?
Paul Newman.
Okay. So we're looking for a scene. I mean, I think what you're talking about is good, but it's a scene where it's Paul Newman. We get to see it happen to him. Okay. And therefore, anyone want to posit something as a scene there? Yeah, Steve. Steve. Yeah, unmute.
Sorry, it took a second. When he smacks her.
When he smacks her, you know, I'm going to say no. I'm going to say no. And again, it happens to them. Lauren.
It's when Jack Warden tells, there's no dialogue and you're seeing them from far away, and it's revealed to Paul Newman that he's been betrayed.
Yeah, I think, Lauren, I think that's absolutely right. And the reason, it's not that all these other scenes aren't important scenes that add up to it, but it's the scene you're looking for that at the height where he's just found out, he's got his star witness, he's going to win the case, and right at that moment, and then Jack Warden has found out about Charlotte Rampling, and let's just take it's something that it happens to the central character. And the other thing I would think about when you think about a reversal is that it's not just about the plot, i.e., are we going to win the case or not? But it's also something very personal, that he's in love with her and she has betrayed him. It's happened to him. So let's Zach, let's look at that scene. The reason, again, is it happens to him. You don't need to hear the dialogue. We know what the dialogue is, but it's really, again, to Paul Newman it happens. And it's a very smartly filmed scene. One of the things I love about it is that here it is, he's finding out about this perversion of justice, and there's that American flag flying over it, just so subtle and nice. So the end of Act 2 is you want to, as you've made the worst thing possible happen to your central character, you want to ask yourself the question that the audience asks, you should ask. How can he ever get out of this? This is he is in a dark place, as is pointed out. How can he ever possibly get out of this? And that's what getting them out of it is what Act 3 is. It's writing. It's where you show your brilliance or cleverness in terms of getting them out. And to understand Act 3, in the writing of Act 3, we go back to Act 1 and how character was set up. At the end of Act 1, they reached a point of no return. They had to power through it. So now, when we look at how Act 3 is going to end, ask yourself the question, how do you want the audience to feel at the end of the film? What is the image, the moment, the takeaway? So it often helps to go back to the beginning and think of the journey you're putting your protagonist through. What was important to them on page 1 is now going to be the opposite in the end of the movie. They've been forced to change. And I mean, if you think of what I was thinking about Lady Bird recently, the Greta Gerwig movie with Saoirse Ronan. In the beginning of the movie, she hates her mother. She actually throws herself out of the car as she's arguing with her mother. The last line of the movie is she's talking to her mother, and she finally says, "I love you, Mom." That we've gone through an arc of character, if you will. So Act 3 repeats really the rising action of Act 2, but now we see what the protagonist is truly made of. And it leads to the climax of the movie. So let's ask the question, how do you define, so it's another word like plot that we use all the time. How would you define climax? What's a climax? Yes? You use it all the time. Any raise any hands going up there? Anyone want to take a stab? Yeah, Alexandra?
It's the resolution of the character's main conflict.
I'm going to say no.
Okay.
I'm going to say resolution happens after the climax. What is the climax? Anyone? Yeah, Michael?
When the character overcomes the main obstacle?
Well, well, I think that's a good way to put it. It's when the protagonist faces against that main obstacle, faces the antagonist, if you will. It's the scene we've been waiting to see. So, I mean, I always think back, the Mad Magazine. Mad Magazine used to have a feature, scenes we want to see. This is, in a movie, you should be thinking, what is the scene I really want to see, which will send people out the door talking about the film. I can't believe he did it. It really is, in whatever the story is, it's Rocky versus Clubber Lang, or Kramer versus Kramer, or Luke versus Darth Vader, JoJo versus Hitler. It is that big scene that we want to see where the protagonist does something that at the beginning of the movie they were not able to do. And it doesn't matter if it's a comedy or a drama. In a comedy, the same, in Knocked Up, Seth Rogen still has to kind of have the big scene with Katherine Heigl where he mans up as a father. That it's the scene that we want to see. In The Verdict, anyone have a thought on what that scene is in The Verdict? Lauren?
It's the courtroom where he has to go to trial and he's facing off against the big, powerful attorney law firm.
That's certainly the big scene. And what is the moment in that scene, Lauren?
The climax of that moment.
Of that scene.
I guess where he's questioning the nurse, the one who reveals.
Yeah, it's possible. I'm going somewhere else. For me, anyone else got a thought? Yeah, Julia.
His closing speech.
Yeah, I think the closing speech is where he does everything he says in that speech. I don't want to look at it right now, but if you go back and look at it, he doesn't talk about the case at all. He talks about himself and the journey he says things that he could never have said when he was in that bar playing pinball. And I think that's so that we start to learn something and see that he has in fact been transformed, been changed. He wins the case, and then we get to, I think, what someone just brought up, the resolution. And resolution is the end of the movie. What I like about resolution is the word itself, resolution, that there's a solution, that the problem that was posed in the beginning about our disgraced lawyer who needs redemption, as we've talked about it, now there's a solution to it, and there's the final scene. And often, and this is another technique that I would really suggest to you in terms of writing a movie, is to bookend the opening and the closing. Do you know what I mean? But does everybody know bookend, or do you want me to explain it a little more? Yeah, if you want me to explain it more, raise your hand so I can go into it. Okay. So when you bookend something, it is how the first scene of your movie, the elements of it in some way are repeated in the final scene. How the opening, not the first scene, but the opening of the movie is somehow repeated at the end of the movie. And if you think about, since we're using The Verdict as an example, and remember that last scene, let's look at the last scene, Zach. So when we think about this beautiful shot there, how is it a bookend to the opening of the movie? Anyone want to pipe in? Yeah, Kirby?
I guess it's like a few things. I think one, like in the beginning, there's no dialogue. Two, there's also like the sound. Originally, it was the sound of the pinball machine. Now it's the sound of the ringing of the phone.
Yeah.
And the sipping of the beverage. Kind of a really introspective moment on both ends of the film, the beginning and the end.
And what beverage is he sipping?
Now he's sipping coffee as opposed
Now he's
to
sipping
alcohol.
coffee. Exactly. I mean, I think you're absolutely right. Any other thoughts about that? Anyone else? Yeah, Chris?
He's on his own.
Well, he's on his own, but what? He was on his own in the beginning. What's the difference? What's the difference between how we see him in the beginning, how we see him in the end?
He's at peace with himself because
he's at peace, and how do we know it? He's beautifully lit. I mean, this is, in the beginning, you couldn't even see his face. He was in the dark. Now he's relaxed. He's lit beautifully and completely, pretty much at ease. So it bookends it really beautifully. And the phone is ringing. I love your point, Kirby, about the sound of the ringing and the sound of the pinball. I think it's a great point, and I think he is going to answer. It's Charlotte Rampling, so at some point he's going to answer the phone, right? But he doesn't have to do it on camera. But I want you to really think about, as you start to construct a screenplay, how, when you're in control, when you're an artist in control of your material, this is, if you look at a movie like The Godfather, remember the opening scene of The Godfather? Who remembers that opening scene? Sam, do you remember it? I see you nodding your head. Yes, you do. Who remembers the opening scene of The Godfather? Anyone got the greatest American movie ever? If you don't remember, you got to go see it. Yeah, PW.
It's the person who's asking for protection from Marlon Brando.
The Undertaker's asking for protection, and at the end of the scene, what does he do?
He kisses the ring.
He kisses the ring. You remember the last scene of The Godfather?
Of the entire movie?
Yeah, Kate, you remember it?
The door is closing on Kate, and somebody comes up and says, Don Corleone, and kisses Al Pacino's hand, and the door closes on.
Well, we're in the same, that's exactly right. We're in the same room. It's the same, and Diane Keaton he lies to her about his business. He ushers her out. She turns back and she sees the mobsters kneeling down and kissing the ring. But there's a new Godfather. And in fact, if you think about it, The Godfather is, of course, a brilliant, brilliant movie and more complex than the first movie that you should write. But if you go back and you look at it, and I highly, highly recommend it, when you see the scene that Michael is introduced, he's at that same wedding. He's in a military uniform. He's with Diane Keaton. And one of the mobsters, I think it's Luca Brasi, or one of them, is making a ruckus, and it's really bad. And he turns to her and he says, "That's my it's not me. That's my family." At the end of the movie, it's him. It's his family. That there's that arc of character we're going back to. Now I'm doing this gesture. So go back to a movie and really see. One of the things that I'm suggesting is a pattern, is that as you start to understand the structure of a movie, you can really make that work for yourself and use that kind of, what we're talking about here today as a model to do it, so that it's a conscious choice on the part of a writer. It doesn't meander in some way, and the ending illuminates the beginning. Right now, hey, Jessica, should we take a break now? Or, I'm happy to continue onwards. I don't know if people want like a short 5-minute break. Is that good? Yes? No?
Yeah,
break?
5-minute break sounds good.
10-minute break does not sound good.
No, five.
If we take a real 5 minutes, yes? Or you want to just power on? Take a real 5. This is the movie business. We're back in 5.
Back in 5.
Okay, great.
I have a related question.
Sorry?
I have a related question.
Oh, sure, go for it.
Yeah, if you look at the final draft of the script, neither the opening scene of the pinball or the closing scene of the phone call is actually there. So I think the director actually added it instead of the screenwriter.
You know, I think that, you know, it's hard to say. I know it exactly, you know, because I've read the script also, of course, and I think that's the kind of thing that they added either in a later draft or it was a you know, a Newman idea that he wanted to do. A lot of times that comes from the actor or the director. I think a lot of that really came from would have, you know, it seemed like so many of the things, like with the in that opening that we looked at with the shot of Scotch, where it's there, he's circling the obituaries and the way he doesn't want to lose a drop of it. And he, you know, I mean, that's just great acting. And it's, you know, to me, it's Paul Newman. But it's, you know, in some way it went, whether it came from the writer, the director, or the actor, it found its way into that final movie, which is where we're going, you know, with the movie. And I think the thing is that if you're going to write a screenplay, and if you're starting out and it's your first or your second, it's not enough for you to have a great idea, but you really have to consciously develop the story, however, wherever you want it to lead, however you are, whatever the direction that you're taking it is, but you want to do it consciously in control of the structure. And then what I would suggest doing is to outline it, to make an outline, and then pitch it. And by pitch it, I mean tell it to, you know, not to anyone professional, to a friend, to a significant other, to a partner. Just tell them the story, because you want to be able to make your story good. And I would practice it. You know, I've done many, I can't tell you how many pitches I've done with networks and studios and producers. And the only way to succeed is to practice, is to practice it, tell it out loud, tell the story to a friend, and see where you get lost or where they get bored. Do you even get to an ending? Do you only get to the first act and setting that hook and the point of no return? However it is, you want to be able to start to tell the story, and you'll know what works and you know what doesn't work, and you'll be able to be ruthless with yourself. And that's, you know, rewrite it, retool the outline until you're ready to write the script. The more detailed an outline you have going from beginning, middle, and end, the easier it will be to do the hard work of writing. Because that's, you know, we all know, everybody here, I think, has tried to write and has done it and has succeeded at it to whatever degree. It's putting your butt in the chair and doing it. When I was starting out, I was holding down 2 jobs in a theater. I was teaching, and I would write till 3 or 4 in the morning. And I always would think there's someone up later than me, writing later than I am. That, you know, you have to. It's your obsession with it. And once you have a script, do a reading of it with friends, see what they think about it, get opinions. People will not know how to fix things. They won't know your story the way you know it, but they can tell you where it doesn't work or doesn't make sense. And that's just the process of honing it, of writing it and rewriting it. And then once you have a good script, then I think you're going to really be able to start sending it out to places. You know, to follow through on every contact you ever had, who you know somebody in show business, your cousin is an agent. But even if you don't know anybody, there are so many places that have contests that accept scripts. Even Sundance, you know, I've been on the selection committee at Sundance. They get a lot of scripts, I mean, but they get read. And the key to when you've written a script, there are too many people whose job it is to find a good script. And that's the most optimistic thing I can say. I want to talk about TV because a bit, but any questions about this? Or we'll do some questions at the end also. But Asher, yeah?
Yeah, can we talk about how Mamet in the film sort of blurs the act structure, like the point of no return? It's not real. It's more a personal point of no return because he gets offered the check again, and so they get into a fight with him. His clients, he keeps on doing things early on without consent, like the mourner. He keeps pushing the card at her, or he doesn't tell his clients. And even like the end at the third act, so just like a starting out screenwriter who's writing at 2 or 3 in the morning is not at peace. The Newman character's not completely at peace. He's up late at night. She's in bed. He's drinking coffee. He's still kind of restless. So can we talk about this, like that blurring of the point of no return, consent, and that kind of stuff?
Right. What I would say, and I think this is the most important thing, is to follow your character. In other words, what I think Mamet is doing in the script is following his character, and the obstacles that are thrown in front of him. It's really so what I'm suggesting to you is not that it's a hard and fast rule, although there are scenes that I think are these big markers, but that the character and character is everything for you. If you create a good character, that is going to go a long way to having a successful script. Because if you don't have a good character who we can follow, who's rich, who's got complexity, it doesn't matter how cool the plot is. No, people go to the movies because they want to see Paul Newman or Tom Cruise or Gal Gadot or Saoirse Ronan. They don't go to the movies, and you'll have trouble remembering the plot, but you don't remember but you don't forget the unforgettable character. And so I think it's a really good question, Asher, but I think that the answer is following the character and how he or she works through the story. Okay? Yeah, so we'll come back to other questions too on film, unless anyone has one right now they want to launch into. So let's talk about TV a little bit, because in some ways, and this is going to sound, I think, surprising, there's more opportunity to break in and succeed and start in features than it is in TV, even though now there's more work in TV. And the reason TV, well, we talked, it's exploding. There's Hulu and Amazon and Disney Plus and HBO Max and all the networks and all the cable channels. They're buying. That's the good news. But the hard news is that it's tougher without sort of being out here and really inserting yourself into the television business to get launched. But let's talk about how you do it. It's not impossible by any means. And the first thing is, it used to be if you wanted to write on a television show, and maybe 20 years ago, what you would do is you would write a sample script. And you would write a sample script for whatever show you were interested in or thought. So let's say you loved NYPD Blue or Modern Family or Veep. And you would come up with a situation and you would write a script for that. And people would look at it and say, oh, that guy or that woman is good. She understands it. But that doesn't fly anymore, because people have started to realize, well, if you write a good script for Veep, what makes it good is seeing Julia Louis-Dreyfus say those words, or Dennis Franz do NYPD Blue. So people want to see an original pilot. And if you just to get even a job in a writer's room. So you need a sample script, and the sample script should be a pilot. Now, everybody knows what a pilot is, yes? Right? Okay, right. So there are two kinds of pilots, which I'm going to describe essentially. The first is, and this is true for half hour, an hour, for comedy and drama. Those aren't the kinds of pilots. The first kind is a premise pilot. Does anybody have an idea what a premise pilot is? Anyone? Yes? Lexi?
Is that like Breaking Bad, where you have Walter White speeding down the highway naked, and you don't know what's going on, but you know that you want to follow that?
Well, to a degree it is, because isn't it in the pilot of Breaking Bad where he first starts making meth? Is that accurate?
It's like, yeah.
So, yeah, I think that there may be a better example. A premise, but Kate?
Yeah, hi. Like the episode sets up what the series is going to be about, but it's not really like what the rest of the series is structurally, like Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. Pretty good premise pilot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think you described it extremely well. That a premise pilot establishes the underlying premise of the series from day one, like Mrs. Maisel or Breaking Bad, or Barry is a great example of a hitman comes to Los Angeles, follows his target to an acting class, and falls in love with acting. Or Lost, a plane crashes on the island, and that's a premise pilot. The other kind of pilot, there's not really a name for it. It's not a premise pilot. It's really a pilot. When I was doing the pilot of Arliss, which was a series on HBO, and when we were doing the pilot, the head of HBO, Chris Albrecht, really insisted on calling the pilot. We wrote many scripts, and it was finally a center cut. Cut off the center of the beef. It was a typical episode, probably better than a typical episode, chock full of character and event, but it's an episode that feels like the show. And that's really the difference. I mean, a great pilot that is not a premise pilot might be something like, if you remember, the ER pilot was a great one, or the one that I asked you to watch, the Sopranos pilot. It's a pilot that thrusts us into the middle of the lives of our characters. So you can almost think, when we're talking about structure, that a premise pilot is kind of like the Act One structure of a movie, and a non-premise pilot is like Act Two of a movie, where we're just in the middle of things. It often can be a hybrid of the two, but the most important thing as you think about writing for television is in creating something original for television. And that's where the optimism is. There's an enormous market for something original that's different, because a pilot, your script, must stand out to cut through the clutter. That there's so much clutter. If you think, when you go onto Netflix and you start scrolling through those shows, you've got to look for something that is going to stand out as different. So the first thing that you want to think about is concept. What is so someone want to describe what the Sopranos concept is? Yes? What's the concept? Yeah, Alexandra.
The personal relationships of a mob boss in New Jersey.
So a mob boss in the suburbs, but which
I should say the familial relationships.
His family, but what else? There's one other thing that I think makes it stand out. Yeah, Tony?
And his psychiatrist.
A mobster that needs cognitive behavioral therapy.
A mobster, yeah, I think that's there you are, a mobster in therapy in the suburbs. That we haven't seen that. Or Veep, inside the warped world of politics with a out there politician. But think of whatever show you like, what the concept is, and couple that with a very, very strong central character. Now, a number of series have many characters, like, let's say, for example, Modern Family. But again, for you starting out writing a first pilot, my very strong suggestion is not to do too much on the first one, to start out with one great character, and then of course there are all the other people around them. Starting, when you think about, a series I like is Succession. and it's really built around the corrupt head of a dysfunctional American media family. And all the other characters are great, but it revolves around the Murdoch, Brian Cox character. So you're looking for a way to stand out. The other way that people stand out is with basing your series on getting the rights to a movie like Westworld or a book like Jack Ryan or Gossip Girl. But you have to find a way. The first thing with any original script in television is it needs to stand out with concept and character. And a pilot is a little bit like a Trojan horse in that it's a great gift, and then you open it up and there are all these great things inside. When you think of The Sopranos, there are all those great things, all those other characters who are fantastic, but it starts with the Trojan horse of Tony in therapy. So I asked everybody to look at The Sopranos pilot, which is great. It has what I'm talking about making, and it's great to have a model like this for you to shoot for the stars, that it's a strong, fresh concept, a flawed, broken, sympathetic character. And what is the scene? So, of course, we're going to talk about scenes. What is the scene that shows Tony as a character in that pilot in the strongest possible fashion? What is the scene? Anyone? Arlo?
I think when he's talking about the ducks, or realizing about the ducks.
When he talks about the ducks, okay, it's a great scene. Yeah. Other thoughts? Any other thoughts on a archetypal scene there with Tony? Yes. Just the ducks. Greg.
I mean, I think the scene where he chases the guy in the car who's running and then hits him.
And why do you think that scene?
Well, because he's so happy at the beginning, and then there's just that explosive kind of anger, and it's very unchecked and uncontrolled, and then he's back to being normal.
Yeah, I think that scene, I think that's a really good scene to choose. And whereas a scene like with the ducks, Arlo, which I think is it's so emblematic of the issue and the anxiety that he feels, that I'm going to always be looking, and I think that this is very true in this pilot, for the scene where you see someone in action, doing what they do. What is the scene which is most archetypical of someone doing what they do, making him or her our main character? So, Greg, let's take your scene. Zach, let's look at that scene. I don't know why that scene makes me laugh. Music choice is great, but the reason why I think what makes this scene important is within the pilot, it says this is who he is. He's in therapy, and we see a little later, he has a monster for a mother. He's got a tough relationship with Carmela. We start to understand, but that's who he is. He beats people up and he enjoys it. And we haven't quite seen that with all the other thing around it. And it goes back to character again, following character. And there's when I was doing that first season, The Sopranos, there was an episode that was, while I was shooting, that was was being edited. And it's maybe the greatest episode, in my opinion, of The Sopranos. It was maybe episode 5 of the first season, called College. Do you guys remember College? You remember that episode? Anybody? Yeah. And in College, Tony takes Meadow, his daughter, for a college trip. She's looking at colleges in the Northeast. I don't know, is Bowdoin or Bates or the beautiful Northeast. He's there. What could be better than a father-daughter bonding college trip? And there they go on this trip. And on the trip, he sees a mobster who had testified against the mob and had been given a new identity. And there he was living. and Tony wants to kill this guy. And Tony does kill the guy. And the contrast between that and the college trip is extraordinary. And HBO hated that. And I remember talking to David Chase about it, and HBO wanted him to change that ending. They did. He said it makes Tony too unlikable. We won't root for him if he kills the guy on that trip. Do not have him kill him. And David Chase, really to his credit, fought for that and really had the good fight with the network, and Tony kills the guy. And that's who the character is. That really established the character the way that's seen even more so than the scene in the pilot. And that is where I think in terms of you creating a series is to have a character, and your central character certainly, that drives the story and see them go through the world. And if you're thinking of, as you create a series, if you want to do that, you want to also think about episodes 6, 7, and 8. What do you have enough story for that, for season 2, 3, and 4? Because you're not only writing a script, you're building a world. And that is a tricky thing to do, but again, where your character and your story will tell you whether it wants to be a series, whether it wants to be a movie, what it wants to do. And I think that, there's a lot of, there's a lot that you can do. Really, in some ways, if you can succeed in television, you can do more than you can in features, because you have the opportunity to tell much longer, larger stories. But it's very hard. That's why, in some way, why I think if you want to break into that, it's very good to be out here, to have your scripts, to try to get yourself into an assistant, into a writer's room, into starting to move on to the inside of that world and really seeing how it works. It will always, in terms of your writing, it will always come down to character and story. And you, as a writer, having stories that you want to tell. And the thing that I want to say about that is, where do you start? And just write what you know. Start with what you know, write from your own experience about characters that you know. I can't emphasize, sometimes you don't know what you know, but write from really who you are and what you love and what you're passionate about. And don't think about what is commercial or not commercial, because that changes all the time. And don't think about what they want or what you think people are buying, because it all changes quickly. And what you want someone ultimately to respond to is you and your passions and what you want to write about and the stories that you want to tell. And I think that's the most important thing, that that you can do it yourself. That's the great thing about writing. It's a great thing, here you are in this pandemic, you can write. It's one, you don't need a lot of people to go film it. Not right now. So maybe I think that's kind of where I want to conclude. But happy to answer any questions and stuff that people
I have a question, if I may, Andy.
Sure.
We haven't talked about documentary at all. Would you be able to say a word or two about documentaries?
I'm not that experienced in it, but I have a lot of friends who do. In fact, the very close friend of mine just did the Michael Jordan one. And I think that that there is a much wider interest now in documentary than there ever has been. And, you can see what's available on Netflix. And the amount of those documentaries, it's staggering how much. And if you have, it comes down to story and character. Again, to, having that story, having that character is the thing that you are passionate about. And that, that the people who followed Tiger King did it for 6 or 7 years. They were passionate about that guy. My friend who did the Michael Jordan thing, they've been working on that for 10 years. That just like in anything else, hard work is rewarded and passionate about a character. It's almost always, again, about a character, isn't it? I mean, sometimes it could be about, I don't know, climate change, or I saw a great documentary about the young girl in Mongolia and the falcons. And you could say it's about the falcons, but it was about that girl and her family. You know, it comes back to the same thing, Steve. The same kind of things, I think. Is that helpful?
That's
but
right.
I think
Thank
there's
you.
an incredible market for it now. Chris and then Deborah. Chris? You're muted. There you go.
I may be the only one that didn't get it. I watched the film twice. I still don't understand why Laura took the money from Concannon. Why did she betray Paul Newman?
Well, I think she took it. She needed the money. She was in trouble. She was a lot, but it's not, in some way, she is an element of the plot, and that you needed that to make the plot go forward. It's not her story. It's, it's, in some ways, who knows what was going through David Mamet's mind, but it's not, it's not her story, and she's there to help the story along.
When I first saw it, I thought maybe she was actually Concannon's daughter, and he was kind of giving her a little help money. But then I saw it again, and I said, no, that's not right. But $575 to betray your lover? That just doesn't seem to...
Well, it was 40 years ago. I mean,
I know. Yeah, I get
that's when $575 meant something.
It was a 1 month rent in Boston.
Yeah.
Okay.
Deborah, you had a question?
Yes, hi. So how does someone like me, I have a health background, I'm in medicine, I have never taken a writing class, acting class, but I've had a long time interest in writing, doing documentaries, even maybe producing a series. You have a lot of medical shows out right now, so I don't really want to do a medical show. I want to kind of do something different. Would you suggest that I take some classes? I actually work at Penn, so graduated, I'm class of 1985. So this was my 35th reunion this weekend. Would you suggest that I take some classes at Penn?
Well, I think, in some ways, I think taking classes is great. I think taking an acting class would be great. But I think there's thinking about writing, and then there's writing. And I think to really learn how to do it is you learn by doing. And I would, and also, since you do have a medical background, I would suggest writing, taking some of those great medical stories that you probably have, and turning them into short films, scripts and stuff. And then from that, you'll be able to graduate. I know a lot of people who've started as doctors and now are, and they started and they got on, they had a great medical script that they did, and they got on to Grey's Anatomy, and then they've gone, or any of those shows, and then they've gone on, same thing with lawyers. I think that's a really great way to do it, but go back to write what you know. I would take classes for sure, or in any of that, but writing, and there's talking about writing, and then there's writing, and you got to do it. Yeah.
Thank you.
Kirby?
Hi, I have a question about after, if you do write a script, right, and you go through all the process of, letting friends and family or whatever read it, and you talked about how, it gets to a point where they understand everything, they're not questioning or they're not bored. If you think you have a product that you would like to kind of pitch around to a network or an executive or anything like that, how do you kind of get your foot in the door that way? Like how do you start pitching a product to see if there's any interest?
And Kirby, where do you live?
I live in New York, actually. I'm in the industry, so the first thing is, people in the industry, and people who can introduce you to producers or to agents, and you want to get that script
read by somebody who has that kind of position, and that's I mean, there's certainly lots of things like Sundance and places like that you can submit it, but I think that given that you're starting out and you do know some people, you do have that door cracked open a bit, so push it open. Don't be afraid to be pushy, and just make sure that you only get one chance to make a first impression. Mm-hmm. So if you've written a script and you think, this is pretty darn good, it has some problems, but it's good, I'm ready to submit it, you're not ready. In other words, if you who wrote it think it has some problems, what do you think someone who reads scripts for a living is going to think?
Right.
So be ready, but already you know people, and you can start to push through. And I think that's a good way to do it. And again, if the script is good and the character feels fresh, you have a real leg up.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions or anything? Yeah, Greg?
So I'm mostly in theater, and I know that you did stuff too. I know you had some stuff that was at La Mama like a while ago. You directed
Sure.
MTC. So I'm just curious, kind of for anybody else maybe who's also done primarily theater, what do you see as the big differences between theater and then TV film in terms of writing?
That's a great question. I think in terms of writing, that in theater, if you can write a good play, you own it, you control it. And in film and TV, you have to, in some way, ultimately sell it to a producer or production company, and you lose a little control. The difference in writing is really exactly what we're talking about today in terms of structure. That a play doesn't have to have this kind of structure. A movie does have to have this kind of structure. And really teaching yourself the difference, Greg, is really a big part of it. Being able to think like think in this fashion, as opposed to you can think any way you want when you're writing a play. The other thing is there's a very big difference in when you direct a play. I've directed many plays, and you're directing a play for 4 weeks so you can turn it over to the actors. And then the actors will own the play as they perform it. When you're directing a movie, you have very little time to rehearse. You have to shoot the movie, you have to get it once, and then the actors have no control. You have the control in the editing room, if that makes sense. And that is a really fundamental difference in terms of how it's produced. But in terms of writing in film and TV, there is a structure. And in writing in theater, there is no structure. You create your own play-by-play. Does it make sense? Yes?
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions? Let me see. Look over here. I thought I saw. Yeah, Julia.
Yeah, so given the rise of streaming television, it seems like there's been a focus on shorter seasons, like 8-10 episodes.
Right.
Eve, Silicon Valley, etc. Do you think because the economic incentive is you want to push out a lot of new TV shows so you can get more membership subscriptions, therefore because of the shorter seasons versus like 20 to 22 episodes, which should usually fill out like a whole network's season, television has moved closer to film in the sense that like the pilot is more like Act 1, etc., versus like the serialization aspect of television like 20 or 30 years ago?
Well, you've described the world really, really well. And I think that because there are shorter seasons, like a show might have 10 episodes or 8 episodes, and if you think of it as a kind of limited series, I don't know if you saw Unbelievable on Netflix. I think there were 7, maybe 8 episodes. It's tremendous. And it was like an 8-hour movie. And it had a beginning, middle, and end, but it lasted 8 hours. And that has sort of that kind of story has taken the place of a mid-level movie, a movie like The Verdict, if you will, that people used to make, that those things have gravitated as like longer form cases to television and do have that structure. And this is a, you know, if you see, there's a series now on Hulu called Normal People. I don't know if people have seen it. It's also quite wonderful, but Normal People is like a movie. You know, it's 6 hours long, and it really covers the life of these two characters. It's episodic, but and that means there's much more demand to fill out more hours on all these streaming services. But this has created problems for writers. And the problem for writers is really what you're talking about in television, that it used to be if you were a writer and you were hired as a staff writer or a consulting producer on a series that, you know, like whatever, The Practice, which was going to run 22 episodes. Well, you were being paid for 22 episodes. But now, if a series is only 12 episodes or 8, you're being paid for much less, and they want you to be exclusive to them. So this is really, the writers are involved right now in a negotiation with the studios, and this is one of the issues about writers and length of shows and stuff. It's unclear how it's going to work out. You know, in other years, I would think there'd be a strike that would be, because even though there are more shows on television, there are actually fewer episodes being made. So there is definitely the danger, you know, and if we weren't in this pandemic world, I think the writers could very easily go on strike, but I don't think that's going to happen now. That's it. But you go
on strike and request there to be more episodes? Like, what is the ask that they're having?
Well, one of the asks would be not to be exclusive to a show. In other words, you're on a show for 10 episodes and then you can't get another job, or what they're going to pay you as a minimum and how many scripts you can write. You know, there's all sorts of arcane technical things like that go into it. You know, and also then what the residuals you're going to get. You know, was in one of the negotiating committee for the directors, and one of the big issues, which was what are the residuals you're going to get for shows that you direct that are streaming. And how you figure that out, it's complicated, but that's also a huge issue for writers. If you write something for Netflix, how do you know how much you should get as a residual payment? And if Netflix has 80 million subscribers, what's the difference of doing that and doing it for CBS All Access, which has 5 million? And the writers are, you know, it's a little mind-boggling, I think, a lot of that. But a little arcane. You just have to worry about writing a good script now, I think, is the issue. Any other questions? Yeah, PW.
Yeah, I'm putting together my first project. Sorry, it's called a story Bible for my show, and I have a 1 hour drama. So I was trying to figure out what should my page count be in terms of like being a novice writer who's never been staffed before, in terms of how long it should be and how much and what information to put in there. Because I've read like the Battlestar Galactica, and I think it's like 60 pages, but it's like done by an industry veteran, so they have that room to play with.
Well, that's another good question. So in your Bible, as it were, the question is how long your pilot script should be, as long as you need to tell the story. You know, I wouldn't think about it page count so much as, have I told the story? Have I set up the character? And then if in your Bible you're describing, let's say, the first 12 episodes, if you devote, you know, at most a couple paragraphs to each episode, I think you'll be fine. But one thing you might also want to consider is a lookbook or a deck to go with it, kind of a PowerPoint with, you know, pictures of the actors you think would be right and how it would visually stand out. You know, one of the lookbooks, you know, that it's just that people have shorter attention spans now. And I saw the lookbook for Stranger Things, and it was great. You know, when they were starting out on Stranger Things, you know, who knew what it would be? And it had pictures from Close Encounters in this movie, how they wanted it to look, you know, who the actors would be, you know, so it was a whole besides having a Bible, it was a whole visual presentation. And something like that helps also quite a bit.
Thank you.
Okay. Christina.
I was just wondering about advice just once like a pilot's done. So I've done a feature length and I got a little bit of a connection with a lit manager in LA.
Sure.
He and I were chatting about my pilot idea and I'm like midway through it. And so he's open to reading it, which I'm excited about. But
Right.
then I'm just wondering like other ways, like are there any like big places taking unsolicited scripts, or is it really important that I like connect with a manager or an agent to kind of get it out?
You connected with a manager, so make that your number one priority, and make the script. If you're halfway through the script, really make the script great, because they're going to have thoughts on it. No, but you want to, just the same thing with Peter, when you submit something to someone, you want it to be in the best possible shape. And as I sort of said at the beginning, that this manager, he's looking for material. That's what people are looking for. They want what you write, but you want what you write to be good. And that's the trick of it. But that's great. I mean, so, I think that, make it great. And once you've done that, if he doesn't like it, there'll be other people who will. But it's, this is a great way into the door for sure.
Great. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Any other questions or anything? Yeah. Well, good. Well, this has really been fun. I hope it's been useful for you all, and I think everybody has my email address. So if you have a question or comment or anything like that, don't hesitate to write. But great. Good luck with everything.
Thank you.
But absolutely.
Thank you so much for this extraordinary session. It was wonderful. Happy Alumni Day, everyone.
Yeah,
Thank you.
That's right.
So much.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Thank you, Jessica.
I'll talk to you in a bit.
Hurrah, Pennsylvania.
Yay.
Hurrah for the red and the blue.
Yes.
Aww.